Okay, I think that's good. We might as well get started. It's 2 o'clock. So thanks everyone for coming. This is a panel on the connected workplace, enabling XR with other emerging technologies. So we're going to have a discussion about lots of other technologies, from AI to robotics and other things that are kind of converging along with XR technologies to create a whole raft of new enterprise use cases that are either here with us now or just over the horizon. This panel, large panel, is made up of people with a lot of different viewpoints from different industries and kind of across the spectrum when it comes to these technologies. So just by way of format, I'm not a big fan of moderators just asking one question and kind of going down the line, but we're going to start that way since we have 6 panelists. So everybody will give a brief introduction to themselves and kind of what they do, and then we'll talk initially on the excuse me, my throat. We'll talk on this question first, but I'll start with an intro of myself. So I'm Dan Donovan. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Mesmerise Group, and so our group of companies are focused on both spatial computing and on artificial intelligence and applications across different industries that make use of both of those sets of technologies. And I'll let everybody else introduce themselves as they come up here. So given this trend towards convergence of all of these technologies, there are more and more advanced applications are being put into play within enterprises. So for each of the panelists, what's something in your view that is an important application or is becoming an important application of this kind of converged world that we're entering? And we'll start there.
Dr. Brian Laughlin. I'm a technical fellow and systems engineer for the Boeing company. I work on advanced visualization. So on the convergence, I think probably just the fact that we're looking at convergence now. Forever we've had, you have all these different, you can see it in the titles of the different conferences that you guys probably attend. So we have an AI conference, we have a big data conference, we have an XR conference. Unfortunately, one swallow does not a spring make, and so it's really about the syndrome of these things coming together. The focus is not really on the technology, it's about what are the processes that help you to get to done, basically. So I think just convergence in general would be my answer, that we're starting to pull these things together and we're starting to learn more and more, and you're starting to see it in the integration of these things, that it's not really about the technology, it's about the process that the technology facilitates.
Hi everyone, I'm Rajat Lokesh and I'm an XR developer at SLB's Software Technology Innovation Center. And I mostly work on evaluating immersive tech, hardware, software, and also I create prototypes and help my colleagues across the rest of the company to adopt XR devices into their workflows. And something that I've been looking at recently is BCIs, which is brain-computer interfaces that let you connect directly to a computer with your brain. At least that's the idea. And these BCIs have a lot of potential to change how we live in the future. They will replace all XR devices. And also, we'll all be sitting here and none of us will be talking, we'll just be communicating with our brains, which is kind of absurd, but it could happen. But we're not there right now, of course. And these days, most BCI devices, or commercially available ones at least, use EEGs, which is electroencephalography. It took me a while to remember that. And so these are basically just sensors placed around your head, and they're non-invasive, so you don't have to drill holes into your skull. So they just sit on your head like a crown, and they measure electrical signals at different spots of your brain. And interestingly, I saw this being used to play a video game, and it was a pretty complex game which required a lot of precise button inputs, and the person that I was watching was using this to move a 3D character around an environment. So I figured maybe this could be used to control drones and robots as well. And turns out that this is actually being done right now. And a couple of months ago, I saw a TED Talk by the CEO of OpenBCI, who demonstrated a person who was completely paralyzed from the neck down, and he was able to control a drone on stage using just an EEG device combined with VR. So yeah, I would definitely recommend looking at BCI. I think they have a lot of potential.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Michael Zurat, and I'm the Solutions Director for Spatial Computing and 5G at General Dynamics IT, and that's a new role for me and a new role at the company. And I think in the title, it kind of lends itself to where we see convergence with private networks and next generation Wi-Fi really being the backbone to connect all of these wearable devices that we see up in the showcase upstairs. And then in my role, I run our innovation center, where we kind of showcase the art of the possible to primarily our defense and government customers.
I'm Jeffrey Berthiaume. I work for Southwest Airlines as a senior innovator. For convergence, one of the things that we really like is the availability of different technical platforms that we can put together to make our use cases work out. So one of the things we did is a big thing in Atlanta where we kind of took over a couple of gates, made a new passenger movement project where new digital signage, new information that we were sending back and forth. The operations agents, the customer service agents all had iPads that were communicating in real time. But then when you get people out through a jet bridge, it's basically there's no power, there's no network, it's a Faraday cage. And so we use these particle devices, built this little tiny box with a big red button on it, red so it looks like an alert and a passenger won't press it. Flight attendants have extra bags on the plane. They've got to get them underneath the plane before they go. So they set them outside. Normally, they tell the pilot radios down to ground ops sends someone to climb up, grab it, put it down. They radio back to ground ops who radios to the pilot who tells the flight attendants, okay, you're ready to close the door. It takes extra time. And so we just made this small little box with a little key charger inside of it, this little board inside and a button, and all it does is communicate with a webhook and immediately tell people, okay, I got the bags, you're ready to go. Just that simple thing saves a minute and a half, which is, time for us. More the plane is in the air, the better it is for us. So the fact that we have all those different platforms is really what makes it so unique and so much fun.
Great.
Yeah, so my name is Ed Moore. I'm an operational technology strategist for Chevron. Basically, we're accountable for developing our strategy in the OT space. I've been working with XR probably since about late 2016. As you look at these technologies, I think there's a lot of new technologies that are going to start integrating across the board. So everything from digital twin to OpenAI or the whole large language models. So I think what we see as we start looking at what do our facilities look like in 2030, 2035 is one, we want to have more digital systems everywhere. But if you start looking at the interaction models, and it was spoken about previously, is the workflows. So how do we get these digital systems to more naturally interact with our employees, our field specialists, et cetera? I think you'll see these kind of chat GPT type actions. So not only will they be able to be little basically helpers with you, right? But you'll be able to have conversations with them. Where's this? And it'll point you to that. And if you're using XR or AR devices, it'll actually navigate you to that. It can give you operational data in real time. So you won't have phones. You'll be more hands-free. So again, a little bit further out, but I think you'll see all these technologies starting to converge. And that's one of the big challenges we have today is we have a lot of tech silos, and we really need those all to come under a single platform where everything's integrated, and we're just building solutions on top of that.
Ashley DeBerry. I work in the research and development team at FedEx Express. I currently work with a multitude of different technologies, ranging from robotic arms, RFID, as well as exoskeletons and a little bit of AR, VR. But speaking to the convergence of, pairing up all these different technologies and how we can really equip people with the right tools to really help them with their everyday jobs. I think there's so much opportunity there, not only for the workplace environment and putting your people first, but also with productivity and a lot of things that can really drive the business to adopt and explore these new technologies.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I love that we're in a place where you can kind of come up on a stage and just casually throw out that you're working with brain-computer interfaces or exoskeletons, and nobody in the room is even like, wait, you're doing what? That being said, this is a broad range of technologies that are all kind of coming together into these applications now, right? And so one of the things that we run into a lot with customers and the conversations across lots of different industries is how, there are already demographic factors at play in this kind of skills gap, labor gap problem that's arisen in a lot of industries. Those are only made worse by the global pandemic, and there was a lot of attrition during that time, early retirement, people changing careers, changing directions in their lives, and all of that. And then the demand for normalcy coming back a lot sooner than anticipated. And so, we may have a lot of conversations about existing XR applications like hard skills training and applications with digital twins and things like that. Those are things we've all been doing for a few years. I think this technology convergence is pushing, and the driver being that skills gap problem, one of the primary drivers, is really pushing all of these towards more assistive technologies, right? So it's point of work assistance. It's not just training, not just take the XR experience and then run with your job. And so I'm curious, if we can just have kind of a discussion on the panel about what other drivers, are you seeing that in where you are? What other drivers do you think are really going to push for innovation and ultimately adoption of these converged applications? We could start, let's start with you, Brian.
So pretty much my whole career, I've worked on some form or fashion of what I would call an information kit. And so AI has unlocked capabilities that we've only dreamed about in the past. I mean, more recently, it's been pretty amazing, the transformation that we've seen. One of the things I'm working on now is with the addition of AI, IoT, and big data, what I'm calling smart information kitting. And the idea of information kitting, if you guys are familiar with lean, show of hands, anybody know lean manufacturing? Any lean people? Okay, all right, good. I don't feel so lonely. Sometimes I wonder. So we do a lot of lean type stuff at Boeing, and it's to go through and really understand the processes. I'm a big fan of re-engineer before you e-engineer. I think you need to really understand what you're doing. If you don't, any road will get you there kind of deal. So the concept of smart information kits is stolen shamelessly from lean, the kitting concept. And the idea of kitting is like an IKEA package, right? You open up your IKEA box and everything is right there for you. It's displayed, it's obvious, you know what you need to do step by step by step. So with smart information kitting, in addition of IoT, XR, or IoT, AI, and big data, you unlock the power of kitting, you take it to the next level. So the idea behind kitting is how do I enable point of use and time of need information for accomplishment in the entirety of whatever task. The cool thing when you add the smart part to that is it transforms your IT systems into being not just a collection of dumb tools that help me to kind of organize data, if you will, but rather a smart digital assistant that can help me to actually be aware of things in the environment, for example, that I might need to be aware of, changing environmental conditions. So if I'm a mechanic, for example, at Boeing, I'm working on an airplane. We have a thing called lockout tagout. If you're going to be in a high energy situation, I need to make sure that I safe the plane. Well, sometimes we forget about that. We get really busy. And so if I'm going to go into an eBay and start changing things out, it's really important that I've lotted out the plane. Well, with a smart information kit, I could have the sensorization, the plane itself. I could have different kinds of sensing devices that would be able to tell that the plane is powered up. And so I could have it shoulder tap me and say, hey, I realize because you clocked onto this particular job and I know it exists in the eBay, that you intend to do this particular work, you're in the presence of these tools, all this kind of thing. All the constellation of things says that you're going to come into my eBay and do some work on me, but that ain't happening because I'm powered up and you need to power me down before you do this. And if you don't, I'm going to give you about 5 seconds, T-5 to do that, or I'm going to shut down. And then you're going to have to go back and make sure this is all done through these steps to make sure that I'm safe. So I think there's a lot of promise that is offered to us in terms of having our IT assets become a smart digital assistant as opposed to just a collection of dumb tools that we have to invoke.
So you mentioned the skills gap, and I've kind of noticed that in my day-to-day work as well, where a lot of my colleagues, they reach out and they have a lot of ideas to use XR in their workflows and processes. But they're generally like manufacturing and testing guys, and they don't have software engineering skills to actually build XR products. So LLMs and generative AI can help a lot here, especially since the last year it's been crazy, the amount of things that you can do with these. And also, I think Meta, Google, Apple, and OpenAI also published a few papers where they can use generative AI to create 3D models, which is crazy. But there are issues with AI. We do need to be careful, I think. I mean, I'm not saying there's going to be a Terminator situation or anything, but there is a non-zero chance of that happening. So I always say please when I talk to AI. But seriously though, there are issues with AI like data privacy and biases as well based on what data AI is trained on. But most importantly, what annoys me the most about AI these days is they just give you wrong answers sometimes. So I can't, if somebody asks me they want to develop an XR application, I can't just point them to an LLM or generative AI and ask them to use that to do it, because there still needs to be a human in the loop to verify these answers, which sort of negates the whole use case, in this use case at least. But this will improve over time with better data and more training. And also, I feel like everybody who wants to use generative AI should kind of level up their prompt engineering skills, which is where you kind of use particular phrases and ways of asking AI, the AI questions so that it gives you relevant answers, which honestly sounds like how you would speak to a person, which is interesting.
We just focus there for 1 second. So I think you're right about generative AI in general, right? I think one of the first obvious things that it does is it provides a new kind of interface to a lot of technology, right? And so, you know, you can look at the things that have come from existing assistive technologies that are out there. You know, people are less afraid to ask a question of an artificial intelligence than they are of a human mentor or something in the room, because they don't want to ask a stupid question or, you know, be embarrassed in front of their peers, those kinds of things. That natural language interface that feels human and is intuitive and natural means we don't have as big a chance of messing up the UX design of a new system, or, you know, things like that are walls, barriers to adoption, right? And then on the other side, you have a different kind of interface. Now, I mean, you're working with brain-computer interfaces. You think the uncanny valley of artificial intelligence is weird. And on the other side, you're looking at the exoskeleton things and robotics that are now allowing a different type of interface, an output interface that lets you really do kind of superhuman things. So as everybody keeps contributing, I'm also curious about those barriers to adoption and how those are coming down as these interfaces evolve. And you know, what's next with these kind of superhuman powers that having such an intuitive interface into a machine it lets you have, right?
As far as honestly barriers, one of the things we're seeing is not just an overwhelming amount of data, right? Too much for one person to consume at one time, certainly, and I think we're seeing that even more so, you know, with immersive and overlays for wearables, where, you know, how do you manage that and trying to push more of that processing, right? You leveraging AI to the edge where you're only seeing important, right, alerts and data to a user. And I think from a technologist perspective, we always tend to push more data and try to overwhelm our users, right? So I think that's something where we're seeing what's the right balance of, you know, being informational without overwhelming, you know, and causing stress for the user.
To add on to that, one of the barriers that we've seen with implementing any kind of like powered wearable technology, operations, they may love the product and see a lot of value in it, but if it's powered, there's a lot of logistics that have to go into figuring out where is this going to be stored, how is it going to be charged, and if you're in an operations environment, space might be really limited. And so it's really interesting. I mean, this space is having a lot of growth, especially over the past 2 years. A lot of these companies are coming out with brand new versions of their product that are really groundbreaking, and so it's great to see them pivot and hear some of the business our concerns and what's stopping us from actually rolling this out and buying in bulk per se. And so yeah, I've seen them grow at least from the past 3 years specifically to really try and fit into our operations.
So I was mentioning to Ashley earlier, we have all of the same problems that she has, plus we have the unions that we get to deal with. So that's a barrier for adoption. And it's interesting because we've got Southwest Airlines, we've got people that have been working with the airline for 30 years or more, and then we've got the person who started a month ago. And so there's a lot of that. And I saw a statistic a year ago that was saying, and this is shocking to people inside Southwest, 1 in 5 people will have just joined Southwest within the past year that work at the company, which is unheard of for us. But then you've also got, here's a new technology, here's something that I designed that will make things better. And you hand it to a person, and you're going to have the people who's like, I've got my notepad, I'm good. And then you've got the people who have come in who are a year or two, they're like, oh, thank goodness you finally automated this. And so we've got this it's like when you're trying to design an interface for someone and you're trying to teach them, and it's like, well, are you a visual learner? Are you an auditory learner? Are you kinesthetic? And so we try to do that, and we kind of handle all those different types of people, the way they interact with things. And I think we're going to be getting lots more of that in the future as well.
Yeah, I'll just build on that. So, I mean, from a technology perspective, connectivity is critical here. If we don't have good connectivity, a lot of these use cases can't even be executed, so that's kind of table stakes. But I think the other key thing for us is safety. Safety is so foundational. So if I lose connectivity and it can't tell the person what to do and that next step is critical, that's a problem, right? Or if I'm using a large language model to guide the person, those are not deterministic. So if it gives me a wrong answer and they execute that, they could basically get in a very unsafe scenario. So I think the whole safety area is going to be critical as we start progressing this, and these systems are going to have the fail safe to where they don't guide somebody to do something that's unsafe.
Yeah, I completely agree, Ed. I think Gartner has been releasing a lot of stuff lately, as they're wont to do, about that topic, about AI risk and safety and all of that. And they're looking at where things are in the hype cycle and seeing that it looks like we've got, within the next 2 to 5 years, this needs to be a solved problem, right? And so I think it's interesting to see how, as the technology evolves and some of the other barriers that you all mentioned, things like connectivity and like edge computing devices that are starting to come, the way the XR and AR hardware is getting thinner, better, higher quality. They're starting to solve some of the optics problems and all of those things. That's another type of kind of macro convergence that's happening, right? And in some ways, it feels like the clock is ticking for us to solve some of these risk issues, right? So, yeah, that's an interesting angle on the whole thing. Anyone else want to add something about adoption and use cases and things?
I'll add on the XR or more on the VR side. When we started to push things out of our lab, and I'll just, speaking for my company, engineering-wise, we're probably more than 90% men, in the engineering department, and despite our best efforts. So, in our department, I don't think we have a single female in the, extended realities group. So it's a real challenge when we try to test and move this out to a wider audience, and we're finding a lot more, I use the term cyber sickness or motion sickness, and I don't know if that's something that you guys have experienced, but on the safety side now we have to have, warnings and briefings and really kind of push the safety non-disclosure, so to speak, front and center, versus I think that wasn't something, internal to our engineering groups that we anticipated.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one, I see that a lot. I see everybody else up here kind of nodding as well. Another thing that we are seeing as of really high importance, which is another one of these kind of threads that goes through all of these solutions, is just an increased awareness of the bias that's kind of baked in to everything that we've been doing, all the data sets we've been using, all the way machines are designed, all the way our processes work, all of that. There are lots of little subtle biases that were hard to spot before, and now when you really can analyze a lot of data across a lot of dimensions at the same time, it becomes glaringly obvious. So I think the ethical considerations, that's another thread that needs to be woven through all these solutions. It's like sustainability, right? That also now needs to be part of the fabric that we build solutions from, I think. So, if anybody wants to.
So it's interesting socially that it feels like lately there's been kind of a zeitgeist to kind of nullify, differences between the sexes, male versus female in particular. The fact of the matter is I'm a human factors psychologist. My PhD is human factors psych and my master's in experimental psychology, so I know a little bit about some of this stuff. We're seeing, there's actually an article that was, I think, recently published that was talking about sexism relative to devices, right? And so there really are sex-based differences between IPD, for example, interpupillary distance, the shape of the head, the size of the head, so how these things fit. And it isn't one size fits all. As much as we would like to, kind of claim equality on some of these things, it's simply not true. And so I think we do ourselves a disservice to not recognize those fundamental differences physiologically, and that can lead to dangerous situations where we're not addressing those things appropriately to make sure that we're keeping our people safe regardless of how a person would identify or not. So I think we have to be very careful about that in some regards. When it's a little bit of a slippery slope type thing. I think it's independent, but I think we have to be very careful to make sure that we're actually looking at what the true requirements are for the physicality of the devices, and that we're addressing those kind of things to make sure that we're keeping our people safe. So I hope that makes sense. But.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think these things become glaringly obvious when it is in an environment where it might cause a safety situation, or in industrial applications, in transportation, especially aviation applications. These are the use cases that will, by necessity, I think, get us solving these problems, right? And really paying attention to what the data are telling us. We've been through the big data thing for 15 years or so now. I think this is another bigger wave of kind of realization of what all that data is telling us, right? With interfaces that are much more intuitive to pull those insights out.
There are also, I don't know if you guys are aware, but there's also some really interesting cultural changes. For example, the way that we process language. For Asian cultures, they tend to process language and linguistic properties more in the music, what we consider traditionally to be kind of the musical centers of our brain. So the way that we actually perceive and receive information and the way that we experience the world is often dramatically different based on some of these different things. And just because we may not be aware of those other differences on behalf of somebody else doesn't mean that they don't exist. So I think there's a lot of examples like that, and I'm glad that we're starting to put the hard science on that, to bring that stuff forward. And it's not to be exclusive or anything like that for anybody. It's simply to keep people safe and to make sure that we really are addressing the kind of problems that we need to address to keep our folks safe.
Very good. So we've got about 15 minutes left here. If anyone else wants to kind of bring up a new topic, or we can also open it up to some questions from the audience, if everybody's up for that. There is a microphone floating around out there somewhere, so if you have any questions for the panel, just raise your hand and somebody will bring you a mic. Yeah, of course, it's always the person who is absolutely the farthest away from you.
I need to work off some of that
How do you articulate the value of air? these technologies, AI, XR, AR, whatever it is. The reason why I ask that is typically the justification we give to get funding for these things are efficiency justification. So it's going to make them do something quicker, faster, easier. But what's the financial value of doing something quicker, faster, easier if you can't quantify it?
Yeah, I'm going to just chime in for 2 seconds, and then whoever wants to have input. I tell people all the time that unless you can define the right metrics, the right measurement, and the right way to analyze the outcomes of what you're doing, it's very hard to show that value, the return. People start with vague ideas. I'll give you an idea. Working with a customer of ours in the airliner maintenance, aircraft maintenance world, who said they want to redo their training, right? It's like, we know all these technologies can do a much better job of training now. And so the question is why, right? It's like, well, because we're seeing this problem where people come out of training and either there's a lot of attrition or, there's kind of a gap in the middle. There's not a lot of mentorship. And it's, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Why is that a problem? Well, we do a lot of rework. That's very expensive. Why is that expensive? Why is that a problem? Well, because the turnaround times go up, and then there's problems with logistics of just moving the planes around the airport, and then planes aren't leaving the gate on time, and then, okay, so the real value is keeping more planes in the air more of the time, right? We all know that's the primary driver in that business, right? But along that journey from like, we need better training to keeping more planes in the air and keeping customers happy, there's a lot of insight in each of those times you ask why, right? So my answer to your question, even though I'm the moderator up here, would be you have to ask enough levels of why to understand what metrics to define to do that calculation of the value.
So we've done a lot of testing to figure out what those answers are, and to continue with the airline thing, one thing we found is when an operations agent, the person who scans the tickets, has a question for somebody on the plane, what they do is they stop what they're doing, they go through the jet bridge, run in, talk to the flight attendant, and come back. Flight attendants are not legally allowed to step out of the plane because of FAA rules and other stuff. So anyway, so they have to run down and do that. And we are a low technology company, so we don't really have everybody on different devices where they can communicate, and trying to go into Microsoft Teams. Yeah. We're doing some other stuff for that, but right now it's mostly manual, and every time they do that, that's about a minute and a half. That can contribute to $1 million of loss in revenue, because again, we're a point-to-point airline. Not all airlines are like that, but it can cause a slight delay on this flight, which gets in later, or costs us more fuel to get on time, which can cause another flight and another flight, and it cascades. It's this network effect. And so when you see that, you're like, oh, and if something's happening at a flight at 7 in the morning, and they're going to Florida, and there's weather, and it keeps adding up and adding up and adding up. So I'm not even saying training, I'm saying just communication helps fix all of those things. So we're always looking for good uses for that. But one of the other things is it doesn't have to be like some amazing technology. We don't have to have everybody with 3D goggles, that sort of thing. If you step onto a jet bridge of a Southwest flight, as you walk on, you'll see a tube, PVC pipe, and that pipe is there so they can communicate with the guys underneath for fueling. Do any of you guys know this? And so what happens is the ops agent gets their weight and balance stuff, and they calculate it all out. They pull up the little string, they write on a little piece of paper, they drop it down. It works. It works. So if it works, it's great. But we're trying to find a lot of little things like that make things easier and more efficient.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here. One, if you're a medium, large-sized company, you should have a dedicated innovation group that's just looking at technologies and trying to see how they can be applied. But really, once you do that, you really have to start going directly after the business case. So you heard multiple business cases here. So I'll pick one we did back in 2017, 18. We had to send experts all over the world to solve problems. And sometimes those problems they would solve in under an hour. They would spend 3 days traveling, right? And so we were able to justify the technology. We used Microsoft HoloLens at the time and Remote Assist to basically move. We had the tagline, any expert anywhere in the world in under a minute, right? So that justified itself, and then the pandemic hit, and that even more justified it. We recovered that orders of magnitude over. As you look now forward in the future, things like AI, these chatbots, now it's any expert, any discipline with you 24/7 answering all your questions as the best it could be. So I think you just go after a use case, you quantify that use case. Travel was very easy. Safety, that was very easy to identify the value there, and then we could justify the cost within 1 or 2 trips.
So I'll pick on the aerospace one a little bit more since I'm a Boeing guy. One of the things that people misunderstand a lot of times, when you make a mistake, we were talking about how it snowballs out of control, the cost of things. So in our daily lives, if we make a mistake, usually it's a 2-factor cost, right? I did something, I have to redo it. Okay, it cost me twice. In aerospace, it's at least probably an 8-factor fold increase, and here's how that is. I did something, I have to undo it, I have to redo it, I have to document each step, I have impacts to schedule, labor, costs, materials. It's just out of control, right? So that's why we're so particular and so anal about this stuff, is we have got to nail that every time. There's lives on the line. It's a very big deal, right? So that's how that stuff can get crazy. One of the ways, a little bit more directly to your question about how do you monetize these technologies and the benefit of them, 2 things. One is that this technology is never the solution. The process is what actually gets you paid, right? So I would go really hard after the process. I would go ahead and establish a baseline. There can be a Taichi Ono, right, father of lean. There can be no Kaizen without a baseline. So you have to understand, where am I at before I can understand where I'm going to or where I came from. So you want to baseline that. And what I use is a value stream mapping type exercise, and I go and I map out all the process steps, right? The second step is you go back and you improve those. Each step in that process has to satisfy 3 conditions to stay in that process. This new streamlined one I'm developing has to transform the form, fit, or function, be done right the first time, every time, and something the customer would find value in or would be willing to pay for. If it doesn't satisfy all 3, can't be value added, right? The value added stays. All the non-value added goes immediately. Sometimes you'll have non-value added but necessary. And usually those are steps that set up for a value-added step in the next step. So I combine those together. I call it wire brushing. Once you wire brush that process, compare your as-is and your to-be condition, and the delta between those will give you what's called, I call it your return on investment, right? Because it's the difference. It's what I did and what I'm doing, and the difference between those is the change that you're making in the process. So that should yield what the value of that is. Now, this is just the process. Then once you get all that figured out, then you add the technology to control, accelerate, and or distribute the information aspects of that, right? So if you can understand those things, that'll give you a good solid baseline to help you go back to your management and the finance folks and say, here's the changes I plan to make, here's the steps reduction, dollar reduction, headcount reduction, all these different kinds of things, the different classes. And then these are the technologies, if I invest in these, I can get these improvements, and here's what the payback would be. So hopefully that'll be helpful for you.
Can I?
There you go, that one's free.
Sorry.
I wanted to nail that, because I think it's an important question. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's not just important to look at the monetary benefits of new technologies, but there's a lot of external stuff as well that you might not see a direct monetary impact. One example I could think of is the person from Meta earlier today was talking about how people discover new technologies at work, and it kind of drives them to use those technologies in their personal lives as well. And that's how I think it should be, because if it's the other way around, they're using more advanced technologies, but at the workplace it's still 10 years old, they're probably going to go to a competitor, or at least it'll be a factor. And especially kids these days are growing up with VR devices, and they're always on their iPad. So for VR, for example, is I think that by the time they become older and join the workforce, they're going to be much better than us at using VR. So if we have VR in the workplace by then, again, it could be a driving factor to kind of attract them to join.
Great. We might have time for one more question, if there are any. Have to let Fred get it. I can't. The lights are blinding me.
Justin Piedra from Subsea Solutions. Kind of touching on what you were talking about funding. What investment and funding models can best support the research and development of XR when combined with other emerging technologies? And how can we encourage the public and private sector's cooperation in driving this innovation forward?
Who wants to take that one?
My answer is boring, but it's the stuff I just laid out, right? You have to make the business case. Otherwise, this is all just ideas. Everybody's opinion has the same ground. So I think it's really critical that you, first of all, have a very laser sharp understanding of what it is you're trying to do. What's the original why? Why am I here? What's my mission, right? Second thing, really work hard on that. Go hard after that process. What's the process by which I expect to satisfy that goal that I'm trying to accomplish? Third, make sure you wire brush that process, get it as clean as you can. Fourth, compare the original concept to the final concept, and then that delta between those will help you to ideally to fund that new technology. And that's the formula that I use to pretty great success. Otherwise, the problem is everything's an ask. It's always kind of a pockets turned out, mother may I type of situation. If I walk in with a big bag of money and I say, hey, if I gave you $1, would you give me 30 cents of it? Well, that's a stupid question, right? From a business perspective, of course, that's free 70 cents. Who wouldn't do that? So you have to make it an offer they can't refuse, and the only way that you do that, I think, is by arming them with the correct data and the right methodology so that they can feel comfortable with that investment, is my opinion.
Absolutely, and I think all those things are valid for your part of the question about private sector, public sector, wherever the investment's coming from. That return is there somewhere. It might not always be dollars. If you're talking about research funding and, grants and things like that, I mean, that value could be very much outcome-based, right? But there is a way to measure all those things, and I think doing the math up front is the best way to get people to buy in. Okay, well, I think that's about all the time we have. Oh, is there one more? We might have, yeah, we got time for one more, sorry.
Thanks, Albert. I did not plan him, so no. I mean, we've been working on this since around 2016, but kind of to that previous question, some of this you have to have a little bit of an investment portfolio to try new things and to test out new technologies. And Houston has a huge innovation organization now. That was started actually back in 2017, and they started doing work in AI and IoT and these other areas because we just didn't have the innovation. It was back when we tried to get Amazon to come to Houston, and we got cut like before they'd even top 20. And so there's been a huge push to get innovation because if you look at where Houston is, we have Texas A&M, which is the best university in Texas, 90 miles away. Then we have UT and we have Baylor. We have all these universities around that can feed talent in. And we have these major industries of oil and gas, medical, and space. And it's like, how can we not be this innovative? And we were. We just weren't doing that in a more smaller form factor. So I think this is one thing that Houston's gotten better at.
A big oil company doesn't just drill holes and make money?
No, that's not. That's number one.
Absolutely. Well, thanks very much to the panelists. I feel very lucky. My job as moderator was super easy because this is an amazing group of people. I'm sure we'll all be hanging around later. Mesmerise has a booth in the expo area, but we'll all be around later today if anybody has any other questions. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming.